Is that a whale? It's an orca, I corrected. Life-sized, and it's going to water the lawn. Susan just stared at me. You're going to put a giant, water-squirting Shamu in our front yard because Mrs. Gable complained about the sprinklers? Essentially, yes, I confirmed. Think of it as creative problem-solving. I think of it as grounds for divorce, Greg, she sighed, but there was a hint of amusement in her eyes. Just try not to get us sued into oblivion, okay? My name is Roger Fitzwilliam, and up until recently, my biggest landscaping challenge was keeping the dandelions at bay and trying to remember which days the HOA allowed me to water my lawn here in the meticulously planned, perpetually beige community of Willow Creek Estates. I'm not asking for much, you know? Just a reasonably green patch of grass that doesn't look like the Sahara Desert by mid-July. A little curb appeal. A place for the kids, when they visit, to run around without getting stabbed by desiccated crabgrass. To achieve this modest goal, I employed that marvel of suburban technology, the automatic sprinkler system. Now, I'll admit, my system wasn't exactly state-of-the-art. It came with the house, probably installed back when disco was still a thing. The sprinkler heads were those old-school impact types, chick-chick-chick-chick, wee, and getting the spray pattern just right was less science, more voodoo lawn ritual. Inevitably, especially on breezy mornings, a little mist might drift onto the sidewalk. A few rogue droplets might even dare to dampen the pristine concrete apron of my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable's driveway. Mrs. Evelyn Gable. A woman whose lawn was less a lawn and more a putting green maintained with surgical precision. A woman who seemed to possess sonar capable of detecting a single misplaced water molecule on her property from 50 paces. A woman whose life's mission, apparently, was monitoring my irrigation habits. It started subtly, a passive-aggressive comment as I retrieved my morning paper. Bit damp over here this morning, Roger? Sprinklers acting up again? Then came the notes, tucked under my door handle. Friendly reminder, HOA Bylaw 45. Section B prohibits sprinkler overspray onto sidewalks and adjacent properties. Please adjust your system. I tried adjusting. I spent hours fiddling with those sprinkler heads, twisting nozzles, adjusting arcs, trying to achieve perfect lawn coverage without launching any water molecules beyond my designated property rectangle. It was like trying to paint a masterpiece with a fire hose. Impossible. One Tuesday morning, I was out there at 6:55 a.m., making a final adjustment before the legally mandated 7 a.m. watering cutoff. One of the heads was still spitting a little onto her driveway edge. Whatever, I thought. It'll evaporate. I went inside. At 7:05 a.m., my doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Gable, holding a tissue like it was evidence from a crime scene. Roger, she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. She held up the tissue, which had a small damp spot on it. 7:05 a.m., your sprinkler was still running, and look. She pointed the damp tissue towards her driveway. Overspray, again, this is unacceptable, it's wasteful, it's hazardous, someone could slip. And it's a clear violation of the watering schedule and the overspray ordinance. Evelyn, I sighed, trying to summon reserves of patience I didn't possess before my second cup of coffee. It was 5 minutes past 7. And that's maybe 3 drops of water. It'll be dry before you finish your prune juice. Rules are rules, Roger, she snapped. And punctuality matters, as does respecting other people's property. I have documented this instance, along with the previous violations on Tuesday the 14th at 6:48 a.m., Friday the 18th at 5:52 a.m., and she had a log. She was keeping a log of my sprinkler overspray. That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with a rational human being. Predictably, the official HOA violation notice arrived a few days later. cited the dates and times meticulously recorded by Agent Gable, mentioned Bylaw 45B, overspray, and 45C, watering schedule adherence, demanded immediate and permanent remediation, and threatened fines starting at $50 per documented infraction if the issue persisted. I called the HOA management office, hoping for some reason. Talked to Brenda, the perpetually stressed office manager. "Brenda, hi, it's Roger Fitzwilliam at 112 Oak Street. About this sprinkler violation." "Ah, yes, Mr. Fitzwilliam," she sighed wearily. Mrs. Gable's documentation was very thorough. "Brenda, it's literally a few drops of water on the edge of her concrete. My system is old. I'm doing my best." "Roger, I understand. But the rules are quite specific. No overspray onto adjacent properties or public walkways, and the watering times are strict. The board insists on enforcement to conserve water and maintain appearances. So, what am I supposed to do? Hand water the edges? Spend $5,000 replacing the whole system because Evelyn Gable has a phobia of damp pavement?" "You need to ensure compliance, Roger," Brenda said flatly. "Upgrade your system, adjust your heads, change your watering duration, whatever it takes. Continued violations will result in escalating fines." Click. I was furious, backed into a corner, faced with spending a fortune I didn't have on a new sprinkler system or enduring endless harassment and fines from Mrs. Gable and her HOA enablers, all over a few stray drops of water. I stared out at my lawn, then at Mrs. Gable's house, then back at my lawn. My sprinklers were just trying to do their job, keeping things green, but the delivery system was flawed, prone to collateral dampness. She hated accidental water spray. She demanded precise water application? Fine. If she wanted water applied with intention, I'd give it to her. On a schedule, with dramatic flair. Forget fixing the sprinklers. I needed a whole new delivery system. Something big, something wet, something cetacean. The idea didn't hit me all at once. It surfaced slowly, like a leviathan rising from the depths of my subconscious, fueled by pure, unadulterated spite, and maybe a late-night nature documentary I vaguely remembered watching. I was stewing, pacing my living room, mentally composing scathing letters to the HOA that I knew I'd never actually send. My gaze drifted out the front window. My lawn looked okay. A bit dry near the edges where the old sprinklers couldn't quite reach without committing the cardinal sin of dampening Gable's precious concrete. If only there was a way to water just the lawn, maybe from above, like rain, or like... And then I saw it in my mind's eye. Majestic, powerful, black and white, a whale, breaching dramatically, sending spray high into the air, or maybe just cruising along, and then, whoosh! A powerful jet of water erupting from its blowhole, arcing high, then falling back down, watering everything beneath it. A whale. A life-sized whale. In my front yard. Functioning as a sprinkler. The sheer glorious insanity of it made me stop pacing. I started to chuckle. A whale sprinkler. It was perfect. It was absurd. It addressed the problem, watering the lawn, while simultaneously being the most over-the-top, impossible-to-ignore response to Mrs. Gable's nitpicking imaginable. "You complain about a little mist on your driveway, Evelyn?" I muttered to myself, the chuckle turning into a full-blown grin. "How about a scheduled geyser from a 25-foot marine mammal? Let's see you document that." My mind kicked into high gear. Forget fixing the old system. This required ground-up engineering. How big is life-sized? A quick Google search revealed blue whales were out way too big for my suburban lot, probably violate zoning laws for sheer mass alone. Humpbacks? Still pushing it. Orca? Killer whale? Now we were talking. Sleek, iconic black and white pattern, impressive dorsal fin. Manageable size, maybe 20, 25 feet long. Still enormous for a front yard, but perhaps just feasible enough to be hilarious, rather than instantly shut down. One could hope. Okay, orca it was. Material? Fiberglass seemed right. Like those giant statues you see outside tourist traps or on parade floats. Hollow, relatively lightweight compared to concrete. Durable. It needed to be plumbed, obviously. Waterline running up inside, connected to a powerful pump hidden somewhere, underground vault maybe, leading to a nozzle strategically placed in the blowhole. And the pièce de résistance, the timer. Not just watering when I felt like it. No, this needed precision. This needed punctuality. Something Mrs. Gable claimed to value. It would erupt on a schedule every hour, yes, every hour, on the hour, during permitted watering times. Gotta maintain some plausible deniability, right? A brief, powerful blast, maybe 8, 10 seconds? Shooting straight up, then raining down primarily on my lawn. Minimal overspray, in theory, maximum spectacle. My wife, Susan, walked in while I was sketching orca plumbing diagrams on a napkin. "What are you doing, Greg?" she asked cautiously, probably sensing the dangerous glint in my eye. "You look like a mad scientist." "Close, my dear," I replied, holding up the napkin. "I'm designing a hydrokinetic art installation with integrated irrigation capabilities." She peered at the sketch. "Is that a whale?" "It's an orca," I corrected. "Life-sized, and it's going to water the lawn." Susan just stared at me. "You're going to put a giant water-squirting shamu in our front yard because Mrs. Gable complained about the sprinklers?" "Essentially, yes," I confirmed. "Think of it as creative problem-solving." "I think of it as grounds for divorce, Greg," she sighed, but there was a hint of amusement in her eyes. "Just try not to get us sued into oblivion, okay?" Finding someone to build my vision was the next challenge. I started calling companies that made large sculptures, theme park props, even boat builders. Most calls ended with confused silence or outright laughter. "You want a what now? A 25-foot orca that shoots water for your yard? Yeah, fiberglass, hollow, needs plumbing access." "Sir, do you know how much that would cost?" Is a lot the answer? Try a lot. Finally, I stumbled upon Finney Phil's Fantastical Fiberglass, located out in the sticks, run by a guy whose website featured pictures of him proudly standing next to a giant Paul Bunyan statue, a surprisingly realistic T-Rex, and several parade floats shaped like mutant vegetables. This seemed promising. I called Phil. He had a booming, cheerful voice that sounded like it belonged to a pirate radio DJ. "Finney Phil's, where imagination takes shape. What you need, Skipper?" Hi Phil, Roger Fitzwilliam. I need a quote on a large fiberglass sculpture." "You called the right place. What marvel are we conjuring today? Giant ice cream cone? Mascot for your widget factory?" "Actually," I took a deep breath, "a life-sized orca whale, about 25 feet long." "An orca. Beauty. Love those guys. Doing a marine exhibit, roadside attraction?" "Sort of. It's for my front yard." Pause. "Your front yard?" "Yeah, and it needs to be plumbed. I need it to shoot a jet of water out of its blowhole." Another pause. Then a roar of laughter erupted from the phone. Okay, you win. Weirdest request of the year, hands down. A water-blasting whale for your lawn? What in Neptune's name did your neighbors ever do to you?" "They complained about my sprinklers," I admitted. Phil laughed even harder. "Oh, that's rich, that's beautiful. Revenge via orca, I love it. Yeah, Skipper, I can build that. Fiberglass over a steel frame, access hatches for the plumbing, custom nozzle mount in the blowhole. We'll make you a killer whale that'll make SeaWorld jealous." "This," he declared, "is gonna be epic." Finally, someone who understood. Project Free Willy, or maybe Project Soak Gable, was officially underway. Building a 25-foot Orca isn't an overnight job, especially one designed to function as a high-pressure water cannon. Finney Phil worked out of a huge workshop barn filled with half-finished dragons and giant fiberglass chickens. He sent me progress photos, the welded steel frame taking shape, the layers of fiberglass being applied and sculpted, the meticulous painting of the iconic black and white markings. It looked incredible and enormous. Seeing it take shape, even in photos, hammered home the sheer scale of what I was doing. This wasn't just a lawn ornament, it was practically a parade float permanently moored in my yard. Meanwhile, back at Casa Fitzwilliam, preparations were underway. This required bringing in the specialists. First, Pipey Pete, the plumber, a different Pete than the fire pit guy. Apparently, Pete is a popular name for contractors. Pete's job was to run a dedicated, high-capacity water line from my house's main supply out to the designated whale spot in the front yard. He also had to install an underground vault to house the industrial-grade submersible pump needed to generate the required pressure for an impressive blowhole blast. Pete was skeptical. "Okay, Roger," he said, looking at the thick pipe he was laying in the trench across my lawn. "This is serious water pressure we're talking about here. Quarter-horse pump in the vault. What exactly is this feeding?" "It's for a kinetic water sculpture," I explained vaguely. "Very modern." "Kinetic water sculpture?" Pete repeated, shaking his head. "Right. Looks more like plumbing for a car wash to me. Just make sure whatever it is doesn't spray my truck when I leave." Next came Sparky Steve, the electrician. He had to run heavy-duty waterproof conduit out to the pump vault for power and also wire up the control system. The key component was the timer, a sophisticated, programmable digital timer capable of handling the pump's electrical load, wired to both the pump and a manual override switch I wanted hidden near my front porch. "So," Steve said, connecting wires in the vault. "Timer's set. Every hour, on the hour, from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., this pump here," he patted the gleaming stainless steel behemoth, "is gonna kick on for exactly 8 seconds. Sends power to the, nozzle feed?" "The blowhole feed," I corrected automatically. Steve just looked at me. "Right, blowhole feed. Got your manual override switch here too, just in case you need unscheduled eruptions?" He raised an eyebrow. "Exactly," I said cheerfully. "For, testing. And maybe special occasions." "Uh-huh," Steve muttered, closing up the control box. "Just try not to short out the neighborhood, okay? This pump draws some serious juice." The neighbors watched all this preliminary work. The trenching, the vault installation, the electrical work, with intense curiosity. Whispers followed me when I checked the mail. Mrs. Gable's surveillance seemed to intensify. I saw her jotting notes in a little spiral notebook whenever Pete or Steve's trucks were parked outside. The HOA sent a polite inquiry regarding unspecified landscaping and utility work, asking for details. I replied with copies of the plumbing and electrical permits, properly obtained by Pete and Steve, vaguely mentioning preparations for installation of a large-scale permitted garden sculpture with water feature. Let them chew on that. Then came Whale Day. Delivery Day. Finney Phil arrived with the finished Orca strapped to an enormous flatbed truck, looking even bigger and more magnificent in person than it had in the photos. Getting it off the truck and into position required a rented crane and 4 very careful guys from Phil's crew. It was an event. Half the neighborhood turned out to watch. Kids pointed excitedly. Adults stared, mouths agape. Mrs. Gable stood on her porch, arms crossed, face pale, looking like she was witnessing the actual apocalypse. They lowered it carefully onto the pre-poured concrete pad, bolted it down, connected the plumbing from the pump vault to the internal blowhole feed pipe via a discrete access hatch near the tail fluke, connected the electrical for the timer. Just kidding. No lights on this beast, just water. Finney Phil did a final check, polished a spot on the gleaming black fiberglass with his sleeve. "There she is, Roger," Phil beamed, stepping back. "One water cannoning orca, ready to make a splash. You gonna christen her?" I looked at the whale. It dominated the yard. It was imposing, beautiful in a slightly terrifying way, and utterly, completely, magnificently out of place. I looked at the crowd of neighbors. I looked at Mrs. Gable, who looked like she might faint. I looked at my house. I looked back at the whale. "All right," I said, grabbing the garden hose. Not for a champagne bottle, but for the pump vault. Pete had installed a valve to fill the reservoir. "Let's get some water in this thing." It took a while to fill the reservoir. The anticipation was palpable. Finally, Pete gave me the thumbs up. Reservoir full, pump primed, power on, timer active. It was 2:58 p.m. 2 minutes, folks," I announced, maybe a little too theatrically, to the assembled neighbors. "Prepare for the inaugural spout." People shuffled, murmuring. Kids bounced on their toes. Mrs. Gable gripped her porch railing, knuckles white. The clock on my phone ticked to 2:59. Then 3 p.m. exactly. For a second, nothing happened. Then, we heard it. The deep, powerful whoomp of the submersible pump kicking on in the underground vault. A second later, with a mighty whoosh, a thick, solid column of water erupted from the orca's blowhole, shooting straight up, easily 20, maybe 30 feet into the air. It hung there for a moment, a sparkling white plume against the blue Ohio sky, before gravity took over and it cascaded down in a wide-eyed, drenching circle, mostly onto my lawn, but definitely sending a fine mist drifting on the breeze. 8 glorious seconds of hydro-powered defiance. Then, as suddenly as it started, the pump shut off, the plume collapsed, and silence fell, broken only by the dripping of water off the whale's back and the collective gasp of the neighborhood. Kevin Jr. let out a whoop. Stan started clapping slowly. Several neighbors actually applauded, looking amused. Mrs. Gable? She made a small, strangled noise and stumbled back into her house, slamming the door. I grinned. It worked. It actually worked. My water-blasting orca was operational. Let the HOA complaints commence. The complaints didn't just commence. They arrived like a biblical flood. My phone started ringing within minutes. The HOA management office, demanding an explanation for the unauthorized aquatic discharge. Mrs. Gable, apparently recovered from her initial shock, had clearly been busy. By the next morning, the official notices started arriving via certified mail, practically sizzling with indignation. Immediate cease and desist. Operation of unapproved high-volume water feature. Violation notice. Installation of massive non-conforming structure. Whale sculpture. Violation notice. Egregious aesthetic disharmony and violation of community character. Warning. Potential water wastage and violation of municipal water use ordinances. This one cited drought restrictions we didn't even have. Nuisance complaint. Regularly scheduled water eruptions causing undue startle and mist drift. They threw the entire HOA rulebook at me. Fines were assessed immediately. $100 per day for the unapproved structure, $50 per day for the water feature violation, $25 per documented instance of water eruption. Mrs. Gable apparently submitted a time-stamped log of the 3 p.m. debut. My mailbox looked like it had been carpet-bombed by angry bureaucrats. Then came the city officials. The HOA and Mrs. Gable had clearly escalated to DEFCON 1. First, A stern-looking woman from the city water department showed up with a clipboard and a request to see my water meter. "Mr. Fitzwilliam," she said, eyeing the massive orca warily, "we've received complaints about excessive water usage related to this installation." "It's a timed feature," I explained earnestly. "Only runs for 8 seconds every hour during permitted watering hours. Uses far less water than running my old inefficient sprinklers for 30 minutes. I had no idea if this was true, but it sounded good. She checked my meter, made some notes. "Well, your recent usage is up significantly, sir. We don't have official restrictions in place right now, but we strongly advise conserving water, and we'll be monitoring your meter readings." She gave the whale one last dubious look and left. Next came code enforcement. A different inspector this time. A guy named Dave. Not my lawyer buddy, just coincidence. He looked even more bewildered than the first crew. "Okay, Mr. Fitzwilliam," Dave the inspector sighed, walking slowly around the orca. "I've got complaints here about the whale. Structure size, permits, classification." "It's a sculpture," I insisted. "Kinetic art. The water is part of the artistic expression." I showed him the plumbing and electrical permits Pete and Steve had obtained. "Right," Dave said slowly. "But did you get a permit for the 25-foot sculpture itself? Structures over a certain size usually need one, even decorative ones, and classifying this is tricky. It's not exactly a fountain. It's not listed in our code under marine mammal replica, water emitting. And the hourly water blast, does that constitute a public nuisance if it consistently drifts or startles people?" He shook his head. "I gotta be honest, this is a new one for the city. I need to consult with planning and zoning. In the meantime," he handed me another notice, "consider this an official query regarding structural permits and potential nuisance violations. You'll need to provide documentation." The police even made a brief appearance, summoned by Gable claiming the 4 p.m. water blast had forcefully sprayed a child on the sidewalk. Video from my doorbell camera proved otherwise. The kid was 50 feet away, and the wind was calm. The officers seemed deeply annoyed to be there, told Mrs. Gable to stop calling unless there was an actual emergency, glanced at the whale, shook their heads, and left. The HOA, meanwhile, scheduled their emergency meeting. Urgent review and enforcement action regarding unauthorized cetacean structure and associated hydro nuisance at 112 Oak Street. They were bringing out the big guns. Their lawyer would be present. Time to call Miss Diaz again. My lawyer was, once again, simultaneously appalled and amused. "A water-blasting orca, Roger? You really don't do things by halves, do you?" She reviewed the HOA notices, the city queries, my permits. "Okay, the city permit angle is tricky if you didn't get one for the whale structure itself. Might depend on how they classify sculpture versus structure. Water usage is hard for them to enforce without official restrictions. The HOA's case rests heavily on aesthetics and nuisance. Our defense is kinetic art, permitted utilities, lack of specific prohibition against whale sprinklers, and arguing the water blast is contained and scheduled." She sighed. "It's gonna be messy, and possibly wet." The meeting was standing room only. Mrs. Gable presented her case first, complete with laminated photos of damp sidewalks, a chart logging eruption times, and tearful testimony about the constant stress of anticipating the hourly blast and the embarrassment of living next to a theme park reject. The HOA lawyer droned on about bylaws, aesthetic harmony, and the potential impact on property values. Apparently, giant water-blasting whales aren't a selling point in Oak Knoll Meadows. Then Miss Diaz and I presented our defense. Permits, safety features, artistic expression. We laid that on thick. Lack of specific prohibition. We argued the water blast was no more disruptive than scheduled church bells or ice cream truck jingles. We pointed out I was technically watering my lawn during permitted hours. The arguments flew. Neighbors chimed in. some supporting Gable, complaining about the hourly whoosh or the sight of the whale itself. A surprising number seemed amused, or even supportive, arguing it was unique and harmless. Old Mr. Abernathy even piped up, "Frankly, Mildred, it's more interesting to look at than your prize-winning beige fence." Wrong story reference, maybe, but the sentiment landed. The board was clearly flustered, caught between bylaws, potential lawsuits. Miss Diaz subtly mentioned RLUIPA might not apply here, but other homeowner rights statutes could, city involvement, and divided residence. The Great Whale War didn't end with a single decisive battle at the HOA meeting. Instead, it devolved into a protracted, soggy siege. The HOA, hesitant to launch a full-frontal legal assault to force removal, which Miss Diaz advised would be costly and potentially unsuccessful given the city permits for the utilities, resorted to a campaign of attrition. The fines continued daily charges for the aesthetic violation of the whale structure itself, plus additional fines for every documented water eruption event logged by the ever-vigilant Mrs. Gable. My lawyer continued to send letters disputing the fines, citing the permits and lack of specific bylaw violations. It was a stalemate fought with registered mail. City code enforcement remained ambivalent. They couldn't force me to remove the whale structure without proving it violated a specific code related to size or safety for its, admittedly vague, classification. And my engineer friend provided a letter stating the fiberglass structure posed no inherent risk. They did issue a formal warning about the water blast potentially constituting a nuisance if significant overspray onto public property, the sidewalk, was documented, or if water usage violated any future drought restrictions. This gave the HOA a potential weapon, but proving significant overspray from a mostly vertical blast was difficult. Life with Willie, as Kevin Jr. had christened him, became the new normal. Every hour, from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., the pump would kick on with its satisfying whoomp, followed by the dramatic whoosh and the 8-second plume of water shooting skyward. You could set your watch by it. It had unintended consequences. Delivery drivers loved it. Just look for the house with the giant whale. Friends thought it was hysterical and insisted on timing their visits to witness an eruption. Neighborhood kids would gather on the sidewalk around the top of the hour, waiting for the show. Mrs. Gable installed thicker curtains. The turning point came, unexpectedly, during a particularly hot, dry spell in August. The city implemented Stage 1 water restrictions, voluntary conservation requested, but mandatory restrictions on lawn watering only allowed 2 specific days a week, specific hours. My timer system, however, was still blasting water every hour, every day, albeit only for 8 seconds. This was the opening the HOA and Mrs. Gable needed. They immediately filed complaints with the city water department, citing my flagrant disregard for conservation and demanding my water service be restricted or the whale feature shut down. This time the city had teeth. The water department investigator wasn't amused by my kinetic art argument. "Mr. Fitzwilliam," he said sternly, pointing at Willie, "this feature runs multiple times a day, every day, regardless of need or restrictions. While each blast is short, the cumulative daily and weekly usage during restricted periods appears significant according to your meter readings, and the perception of water wastage is undeniable." He issued an official order. Cease operation of the automated water feature immediately until Stage 1 restrictions are lifted or face significant penalties for violating municipal water conservation ordinances. Checkmate? I couldn't argue with the direct city ordinance during a drought watch. Defeating the HOA was one thing. Defeating the water department was another. That evening, with a heavy heart, and maybe a slightly smug Mrs. Gable watching from her window, I accessed Sparky Steve's control panel and disabled the hourly timer. The majestic whoosh fell silent. So, the whale remains. Silent, dry. A massive 25-foot fiberglass orca presiding over my front lawn like some bizarre landlocked god. The HOA, deprived of the water issue, still sends occasional letters complaining about the structure's aesthetics, but they seem to lack the will, or funds, for a major legal battle over the sculpture itself, especially since the city permit situation is murky. The fines stopped once the waterworks ceased. Do I regret it? Sometimes, when I look at the sheer hulking absurdity of it, yeah, maybe a little. It cost a fortune. It caused months of stress and neighborhood drama. It doesn't even water the lawn anymore. But other times, when I see Mrs. Gable meticulously wiping down her car because a bird dared to poop on it, when I remember the look on Henderson's face, wrong story, right sentiment? When I see neighborhood kids pointing and smiling, I think maybe it served its purpose. It was my line in the sand, my declaration of independence from petty tyranny, written large in black and white fiberglass. Life is quieter now. My lawn requires manual watering again, carefully avoiding the sidewalk. But every time I pull into my driveway and see that giant orca looming there, I have to chuckle. They complained about my sprinklers. They got a whale. You gotta admit it's a heck of a story. Now, if only I could figure out how to make him sing opera.